Yeah, so I arrived a little bit late, unfortunately. Missed the new members' introduction, and then arrived literally as they started the conference, which is cool, I guess, from that point of view.
And it's tomorrow that you talk about the industrial
Gandhi, an error occurred. Wait a moment, then try again.
Oh,
this is problematic, isn't it?
I think it's working
for me. Is it working? It might just be that I don't think it's. I think it's just not going live on your Twitter stream. I'm seeing ticks.
That's
for
fine.
Facebook, LinkedIn,
don't worry about it. Then we'll just keep going.
That's fine. I'll just get rid of that. Cool. Hang on. So people are joining us. People might be wondering what's going on. This is our soft start. It's EGP Learning. There's 4 faces on the screen. We've got Gandhi joining us live from the LMC conference. Where is it, Gandhi, today?
Celtic Manor in Wales, Newport.
Exciting. And then we've got Ben and Tara. Hi, Ben, and hi, Tara. Good. Yeah. So just letting people join. How's everyone's week been?
Ticking on.
Not as exciting as Gandhi's.
No, it sounds really exciting. I am hoping that we get some people hopping on the live stream with Gandhi as well. Hopefully,
maybe.
Who's the highest profile person that could join you? Is it Katie Bramall-Stainer or?
Probably KBS.
Okay, good. Right. So we've been rolling for a minute or two. We've got a few people watching, so let's get started. Let me get set up with the jingle so people see a bit of what happens behind the screen. Okay, cool. So welcome, EGP learners. This is a very special episode of the podcast. We are joined by guests Tara and Ben, who work with us on PCN Plus, and Gandhi is joining us live from the LMC conference from somewhere in Wales. So very exciting episode, a little bit experimental with us. Oh, and also an election was called yesterday as well. So we have to consider the fallout from the general election announcement. So without further ado, let's crack on and tech enhance your primary care and learning. Right. Hello, everybody. Hi, Gandhi.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. Yourself?
I think we're good. And hello, Ben. How are you?
Very good. Thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure.
Good. And welcome, Tara.
I am back, second week in a row.
Absolutely. So very special episode today. Gandhi is giving us a live field report from the LMC conference, the UK LMC conference 2024. So that's going to be really, really exciting. I'm sure there's been a lot happening there. First ever for us to have a live field report, so very experimental. And then we're also joined by Tara and Ben, who we work with on PCN Plus. There's a whole agenda around PCN Plus. There's a yearly free conference. There are periodic team-ups of us as podcasters together. I think team-ups is what they call it when superheroes get together. I said that last week and so good, I'll say it again. So we'll be talking about the LMC conference, and then we have some stories from the news, not least the election that was announced yesterday. There will be a general election on the 4th of July.
Looks like we're going to get photobombed in a second, Andy.
That's great. Yeah, who is it?
Yeah. So I've got some of the fellow Nottinghamshire LMC people just standing, and there we go.
Oh, hello, everybody. Hopefully everybody's having a great time.
Yeah,
I feel like I should be interviewing everybody now. Oh, great. Gandhi's back. So yeah, so we'll be talking about how the thanks for that. We'll be talking about how the election may or may not be influencing everything that's happening in general practice. So let's get started. And yeah, so first of all, I suppose we should just, people may not be familiar with Ben and Tara. So Ben, do you want to just introduce yourself to the podcast?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ben Gowland. I'm a director at Ockham Healthcare. I host the General Practice podcast, and I work with PCNs and federations and all sorts of practices working together across the country.
That's great. Thanks, Ben. Your audio just cut out a little bit at the end, so we'll just have to keep an eye on that as we go through. And Tara, do you want to introduce yourselves again for the second week in a row?
Yeah, so my name is Tara Humphrey. I am the CEO at THC Primary Care, where we provide interim network management, and I'm also the host of the Business of Healthcare podcast.
Fantastic. And of course, there'll be people out there as well in the audience who often comment. So JC's sent us a hello already. So do comment if you've got an opinion on anything we're talking about. We'll bring the comments on screen and introduce that into the discussions. So let's get started, really. And I guess go over to Gandhi live from the LMC conference. And yeah, Gandhi, tell us what's happening. I guess people might not understand what the LMC conference is and what happens there. So tell us what's going on.
Sure. So the LMC is the local medical committees. It's the group that basically represents general practices in your local area, and obviously they're local, so various different regional areas and stuff. And they have a conference every year. So this is the UK conference. That's different to the England conference, which will happen later on in the year. And then each of the devolved nations also has their own conference, as well as the sessional committees, I believe, have their own as well. And basically, it's to try and help inform the agenda to the GPC about what needs to happen for general practice moving forward and stuff. So the UK conference is, as it sounds, it's the entire devolved nations, as well as some of the other subcommittees. And they're basically talking about what we probably need to think about for general practice. And it's been a really interesting day, covering quite a broad range of topics. Tomorrow's is probably going to be a little bit spicier. So there's some key things on the agenda, which I know you guys had a quick look at and stuff as well. But it's been an interesting experience because this is my first official LMC UK conference, or any conference in the LMC.
Yeah, really exciting. So I think you've already explained really why people might be interested in what's going on. But does anything that happened there have a real impact? GPs, watching will be going to their clinics tomorrow, not really involved in medical politics. Why should we be bothered about the LMC conference?
So I guess this is your representatives who are elected in your local medical committees, then coming to a central place to basically inform what should happen by the GPC in the onward negotiations. Now, obviously, we're in a bit of a weird situation over the past few years where the government has basically imposed a contract on general practice. So despite those negotiations have happened, the government have gone and said, no, stop it. But we're in a bit of an unusual situation. Obviously, yesterday's announcements made things a little bit more interesting with the pending election. So I guess this is going to inform what the policy direction should be, at least from the GPC's perspective, moving forward with whoever is going to be in government.
Okay. Good. So really opportunity to have an impact there. And I know the motions are a big part of conference, and we'll probably talk about those in a minute. But first of all, I thought we might just ask you, what's the general mood like at the conference, and what are some of the main topics that people are talking about?
So there's definitely the safe working agendas playing a huge part of, I think, today's things. We've heard that quite a few times, both from the chairs and the conference agenda group and stuff, as well as the speakers. There's definitely undertones about MAPs, so medical associate professionals, and how they're working in general practice and the wider sphere, and definitely some stuff around the governance and workload aspects and stuff that's coming through. So they've been key features of today in particular. I know the discussion is tabled for tomorrow morning. It's the first thing on the agenda. So that's probably going to be one of the biggest ones, I suspect, looking at the agenda. And then there's also some micro debates happening in between as well to help inform the policy. Okay,
cool. And I know Ben and Tara might have some questions. They've may or may not have been to the LMC conference before. Just fire away. We can raise hands so we don't all kind of speak over each other, but fire away if you've got any. Go on, Tara.
Go for it, Tara.
So has there been any conversations about primary care networks?
So primary care networks have featured, generally not in a positive light, if I'm being honest, by the sounds of it. It seems to have groans and moans every time it's been mentioned. Not in the sense of, I guess, the direction of or the contractual aspects of it, more in the sense there's a feeling that it's something that was imposed on general practice, and speaking wider to that additional roles aspect that comes through. But yeah, so far today, there's not actually been anything about the PCN DES contract itself, or even, to be honest, much around the contract mechanism from England. Because don't forget, a lot of that is England focused. This conference is about the entire of the UK, so it had the conference agenda is very much kept with the UK in mind. It's stuff that applies no matter where you are based.
Okay.
Yeah, I had an interesting observation about that as well. We'll come to Ben in a second, but I noticed in Pulse that clinical directors sort of come out together today, which is interesting timing with the LMC conference, although it is a day after the election, to call for proper and permanent funding of primary care networks and to make them a permanent fixture. I just thought that was interesting that that's sort of been announced in parallel to the LMC conference, and that perhaps indicates a schism, maybe, in terms of GP leadership. I'm not quite sure whether that's true.
Maybe.
But Ben, you wanted to come in.
Well, just a question for you, Gandhi, about whether you thought the safe working practice debate was linked to a kind of precursor for the industrial action stuff, because we haven't defined yet, have we, what industrial action will be, but yet nearly everything on the agenda seems to be around, what's the safe number of patients and what work should GPs be actually expected to do.
I think it's definitely there to inform the agenda, and then hearing from the agenda committee, they've referenced it a few times. I guess it'd be useful to know the structure of how the discussions work. So there is a proposer for the motion itself, who normally gets, I think it's 3 minutes to speak. So they'll talk about the motion and the points that you've seen in the agenda. So the individual items, and then other people then get to come on and speak about whether they're speaking for or against the motion itself. That goes on for an undetermined length of time, depending on the number of speakers and stuff. And the chair can obviously call time, or the room can call time by calling for a vote if they feel they've heard enough of the discussion. And then it's put for a vote. They use green cards to help inform the vote, just show of green cards generally. If it's looking like for or against is relatively close, then they default to using electronic voting mechanism, mainly for expediency by the seams of it and stuff and things. So that's kind of how the process works. And I think after that, just before the vote happens, it is summarized by one of the representatives from the agenda committee. So that tends to reflect some of the BMA policies. So quite a few times they reference the safe working agenda, the BMA documents, and that kind of stuff to help with that kind of thing. So it's been interesting from that point of view, but you're right, Ben, it has featured a lot, and they keep talking about it as this is the mechanism potentially for things to change moving forward.
Gandhi, I had a question. We might come back to safe working in a second, but I've got the agenda open. I might flash to it in a second, but there are like 150, 200 motions there. Do people might be sat there with the agenda wondering, are they going to discuss all of these?
No.
How does it work, and how do they select which ones they discuss and which ones they don't? How does that all work?
So from my understanding, the way it works, the agenda committee obviously get all the motions in advance. They then look at them and try and basically figure out which is the motion that's most relevant, encompasses most of the key points on the different topics. So they've got stuff on workflow, they've got stuff on prescribing, they've got stuff on clinical areas and things like that. And then they basically go with the motion that best encapsulates that and is different to all the others in some way, shape or form. So yeah, as you can see, for that first one, there's a few motions, but then there's one that's bolded out. That's the one that was actually discussed. So that is, I think, the safe working one, if I'm looking carefully.
That's correct, Andy. Yeah, proposed by Glasgow LMC. And you're right, actually, many of the other motions below it are kind of similar. They're on the same topic, just worded differently. So I guess the motion committee is quite a powerful group then, I guess, because they get to decide what goes in front of the committee.
Yeah, and you have to be elected onto that committee as well. So what will also happen tomorrow is that the elections will close for the LMC positions, of which is included the agenda committee. So various different positions within the GPC, the ARM committee, so the ones that do the annual regional meeting, and the agenda committee will all be voted in tomorrow.
Okay, cool. And
Tara.
Go on, Tara. Yeah, did you have your hand up? I didn't see.
Have you put yourself forward for any committees?
I probably won't, because I think I've got too much on as it is. I don't need any more hats. You're the one who keeps telling me, Gandhi, you don't need any more hats. So I can't. It crossed my mind, but I think it's also not realistic for me to do that.
Okay.
And
maybe next year.
Gandhi, when you've had the debate and then you have a vote and you get the result, what standing then does that result have?
So that result should inform the GPC about the policies they then need to try and enact in some way. Sometimes what happens is that some of the parts may be obviously not voted through. So they go through individual items. And then sometimes some of them are changed to be put, as they call it, for reference. So if there's a technicality point, or actually if the proposer has had from the discussion understood some extra aspects that then they feel actually it's useful, but it shouldn't be a policy guiding aspect, but more for reference. It can be changed for reference, which basically just means it's there, but it's not, it doesn't have to become policy. Now, whether it becomes policy or not, obviously that's then the negotiation process, which, as we all know, is completely more complex and in the past few years has not gone as I think many would hope.
Okay.
Sorry,
go on, Tara.
one more question. We're just asking you questions, Gandhi. Is it very civilized, or is it like the House of Commons where people are going?
There has been some, spicy moments. I'm not going to deny. Probably not as much as I was expecting, if I'm being brutally honest. So someone asked me, what I thought, and I thought it's been a little bit tamer than I thought. No, well, what were you expecting? I was like, well, probably a little bit more than this. I think part of that is because in order to comment, you have to self-nominate yourself before you've actually heard the motion from the original speaker. You can't then suddenly jump up and down and say, I want to talk and I want to speak and things. And I guess that does change the debate a little bit. I know reactionary. I'm one of those people who like to react to things. So every time it's happened, I've kind of went, I'd love to talk, but I haven't put my name down already. You have to kind of put your name down in advance. New speakers do tend to get a bit of a priority. So I may be speaking tomorrow because there's a couple of items there that I thought have been quite useful. So I don't know, might be talking tomorrow.
What are you going to talk about, Gandhi? What motions have you put yourself forward to comment on?
So like I said, I think one of the big ones that's going to come up is the medical association. MAPS, I've forgotten what the A stands for. Yeah, professionals. And also there's one on the SCA.
Okay. Interesting. And maybe we'll come to those motions in a minute, Gandhi. I was just wondering what's the general mood like, because when you talk to GPs and in kind of online forums, things are quite negative at the moment, and we can all understand why that is. But what's the general mood like at the conference? Is it very negative, or is there some hope there, or how's it feeling?
I think the election announcement has made it a bit weird. Generally, there is this air of understanding that the profession is a really unusual and unpleasant place, particularly many GPs looking at lack of employment. It regularly features around the challenges that people have had in getting particularly sessional work and stuff, and the impact that's having on them. So I wouldn't say it's positive. I wouldn't say it's despair, but it's also not great.
Okay, that's interesting. So you're speaking on a few motions. You've probably heard a few motions today. What are there any highlights in terms of motions that have gone through or been close? Or
yeah. So I guess that first one you mentioned, what surprised me that there were people speaking against the motion, because I guess from a GP who feels overloaded with work, often someone saying, well, we're not really supporting a motion that means that we can limit our work and that kind of thing. But what I found, particularly over the past few hours and stuff, a lot of the people that when they do talk against motions tend to be on technicalities of wording. So it's about the way that things are phrased or the commitment it puts and stuff. So many people do end up speaking just around the wording aspect of stuff and things. However, some also bring up very valid points that make you think, actually, that doesn't quite make sense when you put it in that particular situation and things. So I mean, the first motion was passed fully. A lot of these things are already out on Pulse and stuff in terms of the motion results. There was a really interesting debate about ADHD medication assessment and stuff. And obviously, we all know the challenges that exist with the access to services in that part. There was probably the closest vote you could ever get, which was around it was the Grampian one. I've forgotten what it was now. Oh, continuity, Andy. You would have loved it. It was a talk about integrating continuity in general practice as a metric. So, the discussion point of there should be a continuity metric. There should be policy that is how we are measured rather than based on access. And it was 4-1 by 111 votes. Against was 110. So literally every vote counts in that sense, and that definitely sent some shockwaves through when the result came up, and that had to go to electronic voting because it was so close when they called for it and things.
Wow. I suppose that's one of those things where I can see how, I mean, a lot of people would instinctively get behind the, continuity is really, really important and impactful, but should we be measured on it? I guess that's where people might get hung up because we don't necessarily have full control. So I wonder, is that the direction that the discussion went on.
Effectively. So I think many people agree that continuity is a positive thing, but then when you start measuring it, how do you measure it? What metrics do you use? All those kind of things came up. Do you, end up hitting yourself with a stick by trying to measure continuity? Those are some of the discussion points throughout the debate aspect of it. And then as a result, I guess that led to a very, very tight result.
Good. Go on, Tara.
Oh, no, it's Ben.
Oh, Ben, was it? Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Sound like Tara. Gandhi, given the professions on the brink of industrial action, were you expecting there to be a bit more like anger and fire in the room?
I was. I suspect some of that will probably come as some of the topics tomorrow. So that may be part of the reason where a lot of the stuff is more procedural. A lot of the bigger topics do seem to be on Friday. So I wonder if we're going to hear more emotion at that point from what I can see from the agenda items and stuff. And more of the open debate is tomorrow as well. So I guess a lot of the ones we've had are more the single motions and the responses. They have had some aspects of interim debate just over lunchtime about particular topics and hearing open floor effectively. Unfortunately, I had to miss some of that because I had to go do something else. So I missed a lot of that section, unfortunately, but I'm hoping to catch it tomorrow.
And what is open debate, Gandhi? What does that mean?
So they will put a motion, and I can't remember what they were now because unfortunately, like I said, I missed it. Some of it was around safe working and what does that mean, and the contracting mechanisms for salaried GPs and what will that look like. And it's just open floor. So there's none of there's less of you have to put your name forward beforehand and stuff. It's just how many they can get through it. But with that, you only get a minute to speak. I believe it is. It's a much shorter time.
I've got the agenda here, Gandhi. So is this what they call soapbox after lunch tomorrow?
Yes. May have been. I can't remember what they called it now, Andy. I'm afraid. It was lunchtime today. I think just after lunch. Just after lunch. Yep, Tara.
I feel like firstly you're doing an amazing job. It's how you're describing what's happened and going on. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Have you changed your mind about anything? Did you go to the conference thinking one thing and then seen the data, kind of heard the debate? Have you changed your stance on anything?
I think some of the debates, from the motions, the way they read, and then hearing how people have talked about them, there have been some that change my perspective of what they may mean. Unfortunately, I've completely forgotten which ones right now. But I do at the time remember thinking, actually, I agree with that point when I didn't originally think so. There was one on out of hours resourcing that I know, reading it originally, I thought that's obvious. Absolutely, I'd agree with that. It was one of the points I didn't agree with. I can't remember which one it was. Bizarrely, the AI one, I had a bit of an umbrage with. I think it was interestingly written, and what it turned out that part of it was written by AI itself. So that was a rather interesting moment and stuff.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, so the motion proposer basically had 20 minutes to submit it, so he wrote it with ChatGPT. Yeah, which was interesting.
The thrust of that one, it seemed to be about wanting to ensure that GPs were in the loop of decisions made by AI and to put medical decisions on parity with where there are assistive technologies in, say, the aviation industry assisting pilots and so forth, and that there's always a human in the loop, and that humans are valued and that humans are trained so that they retain the skills to take over from the artificial intelligence pilots, the autopilots, if they need to, and to have a sort of parallel convention in medicine. That's what I took from that motion. It looks like it was largely carried. So
it was, but as you can see, that first item was carried as reference. So it came back that actually the term doctor with whatever it was could technically be taken as, for example, a doctor of English, if you've got a doctorate. So because of the way it was written, and that's what I mean by sometimes the bureaucracy of how things look and read sometimes ends up being the reason why people vote for or against particular motions, as well as actually the content of the motion itself.
Yeah, and I guess that. And how important do you think that is, Gandhi? The wording of the motions, given that they don't form policy themselves, they go on to inform further debate. Within the GPC. How important is that, do you think?
I think it's very important, because otherwise then you get into these weird debate situations about the way that they're written and stuff. So, however, I do know that the agenda committee spend a lot of time, and a lot of the motions are batted around with, to and fro, trying to get people to write them in a way that tries to not lead to that being part of the issue. But obviously, if you submit a motion with 20 minutes to go, then that may be different.
So Gandhi, go on, Tara.
All of you, do you feel like between the BMA, the LMC, and maybe like NHS Confed, general practice is represented and the voice is heard in, like in a variety of arenas? Will a GP on the ground feel like, actually, my voice, there are mechanisms for my voice to be heard?
I think there are mechanisms for voices to be heard. I guess the question is which voices are being listened to is probably a different aspect of things. So, clearly I think people would hope that the GPC voice is being listened to when it comes to general practice, because they are effectively our negotiators. I think other organisations is interesting. There is quite a lot of discussion points about the BMA tomorrow on the agenda. So it's interesting you raise the BMA, because even though the GPC is part of the BMA, they are technically separate entities as well. So that will be quite interesting. And then particularly the representation of general practice on the BMA committee, I think, is one of the discussion points tomorrow.
Can you guys create a diagram? It's like, how are decisions made in general practice? Like, who does what, please?
Oh, we could easily look at that, couldn't we, Andy? That'd be a good one to do.
It's complicated. But so Ben, what do you think to that question about who is the voice and is it heard?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? And I think if you asked that question a couple of years ago, I don't think most GPs feel like they've got the RCGP that, and I think linked to some of the discussions that they're going to be having tomorrow, people feel a little bit let down by the RCGP. And then 3 years of an imposed contract, is the GPC really representing general practice effectively if there's no consequences to not have a negotiated contract? So I do think it comes down to leaders and having visible leaders. And I think having Katie Bramall-Steiner as now the chair of the GPC has made a big difference to the GPC. And I think it needs that kind of visible GP leader that people can get behind and feel is representing the profession. Because I think having not had that for a few years has been really detrimental to general practice.
I would add another category to NHS Confed, BMA, RCGP, and the others, and that is, I think NHS England also has its own voice and will often use reports that it has commissioned with kind of individual influential GPs to give them, a very strong voice in debate and setting the tone. We think about the stock take, for example, and how instrumental that has been, and there have been other reports written by sort of individual GPs. So I think NHS England and those individual GPs sort of also play a part in setting the tone and the voice of general practice as it is perceived by the rest of the system and general public as well. And so I think that's an important thing in the mix. And maybe I've not been around long enough to say whether that's always happened, but that's certainly currently like a big influence, I think. Okay. So Gandhi, have you bumped into anyone interesting or influential, or is Victoria Atkins?
Quite a few people. Met quite a few people I haven't seen in a long time, which has been amazing. Particularly people over my course of my career I've come across and not. Met loads of people telling me, Gandhi, I watch you on YouTube, which has been really interesting and a little bit, I still find it weird and stuff. Katie Bramall-Steiner, met her, amazing as ever, and in things. So there's no big external speakers at this kind of conference. It's very, I think, it is very much GP focused. But the GPC committee are here, the agenda committee are here. The people within general practice, they are here. That's quite clear.
Okay, good.
And are you going to go get some food in a minute?
I would love to go get some food.
We will wrap you up in a second, although we'll probably keep you just to talk about the election, and because that was something that you said people were talking around. I thought we'd maybe just take a moment at what might be the halfway point just to just talk a little bit about PCN Plus, because that's really why Ben and Tara have joined us. Together the four of us deliver PCN Plus, which is really kind of a program of a number of things. You know, there was a really fantastic and really well attended hybrid online in-person free conference at Nottingham University Business School last month, looking at the future of primary care networks and the future of general practice. That was live streamed. People can probably still sign up and watch the recordings, I suspect. We also do these team up podcasts, you know, like this whenever there's something big happening. And then I'll just sort of pop on the screen. There's also a PCN Plus course that we run, sort of roughly a cohort a year for primary care and primary care network and general practice leaders. So PCN clinical directors, potentially people working with GP leaders in ICBs have attended as well, and you know, network managers or people working in kind of leadership positions within networks have attended as well. And I really enjoy delivering the course. I was just wondering if Tara and Ben, you're on here, if there's anything you'd like to say about the PCN program or course while we're all together.
One thing, it's a slight change from last year, and I think this conversation is really helpful. It helps you understand the context that you operate in. So yes, we work in primary care networks, but primary care network's not, you know, like the only show in town. It's not the only important thing that we are all talking about, but understanding a little bit about the all of the organizations that happen nationally, but also locally, I think is really, really important. And I think that's the first session moving forward. That will be the first session this time, just really making sure that we understand. So I feel like the more you understand, you can, even though it's still frustrating, you've got more of an understanding and appreciation that it's complex navigating through just layers of organizations. You can do it, and I think having the discussion, having the debate is just really helpful.
Yeah. I'm just bringing on screen. If you want to sign up, go to the webpage. You just want more information, really. Follow that page. Tara's got a really good page on her website about it, and you can look at what the 10 sessions cover. But really, it's sort of trying to encapsulate the main things that leaders in primary care networks and general practice ought to know about to kind of hit the ground running and be effective. Or if you want a refresher or you feel that things aren't working well, then we cover all those sort of key things around understanding the system you're operating in, developing that vision and strategy for the primary care, which is really, really important. How you engage and produce together with the other stakeholders, be that patients or other parts of the system. My favorite session is financial principles, led by Tara, because we, you know, as a GP, like many of us out there, never really trained in managing budgets or financial issues, yet we're often thrust into doing that. There is a session on managing the workforce, on actually operating what does run like a business in a primary care network or a practice. Integrated neighborhood teams is a new session this year that is going to be really interesting. They're becoming really, really important. We should always be data driven, and digital transformation is really important. So we have a session on that. Influencing the system on behalf of your practices, your stakeholders is obviously a really, really important thing. And then there's a session on personal leadership and resilience, because you know, it can be difficult being in a leadership position. There's a lot of pressure, and how do you protect yourself, you know, if and when things go wrong, and look after yourself and be effective. That's really, really important. Ben, did you have anything to say, or what's your
I mean, it's interesting
about it all? Go on.
Well, we set it up, didn't we? Because we had a conversation and recognized there was a gap, right? Because people were being put into these really difficult jobs, and they weren't being given any support or training or help to do it. And I sense from us, because we all work with PCNs and at-scale GP organizations, to say, well, from people who are actually doing it, you know, we feel we could add value in that space. And I think what's interesting to me is how now on the third year of the course, it looks different from how we started it. Because at the start it was like, you know, how do you recruit to the ARS roles and how do you manage the PCN finances? Whereas now it's much more about, you know, how does integrated neighborhood teams impact on the PCN? How do PCNs work together in a place area? How do you influence the system? It's those types of things. So it's like the course has had to develop as the system itself has developed.
Good. So if people are interested, then head along and to the URL at the bottom of the screen and take a look. We'll link it in the show notes as well. Take a look, see if that's going to be appropriate for you or anyone that you work with. So moving on. Election, July the 4th. Gandhi, you said that a lot of people have been talking about the election there. And I know internally we had a conversation as to whether it really makes much of a difference, even. But we might all have an opinion. Shall we go to Gandhi first to give us the kind of your take on this and maybe like the mood around this at the LMC conference? And then I guess we all might have opinions about how this impacts, the current situation in general practice. Gandhi.
So I think it was very much a curveball. Obviously, no one was really expecting. Well, there may have been some people, but many of us didn't expect an election to be called this soon. It was clear that there was a timeline being developed to look at how general practice would approach, particularly next year's contracting mechanism and stuff. And that timeline's obviously now been changed. It'll be really interesting to see how GPC and Katie Bramstein respond to this. And I suspect there will be a lot of stuff coming through in the next few days and weeks. I think a lot of it, though, is also really hard to comment on because we've not had the manifestos through from the different parties. They may drop in the next few hours, next few days, who knows? But once we've got those, we'll have a better idea, I think, what happens. But I think the key thing is that, for me, one of the things that I always had in my mind was that if there was going to be an election in October, by the time you get a new government settled in, would they have time to negotiate an appropriate GP contract for next year? Probably not. The fact that we're going to have an election sooner by that 3 months, actually there is a possibility that a contract could be negotiated within that time frame for general practice. Whether it's a good contract or not, that's another question.
What do you think? What do you think, Gandhi, about the impact of an early election on industrial action?
I think it's massively changed the time frames because I think there will be some people who feel that the possibility of Labour coming in will mean that we don't have to worry about industrial action. I guess my concern is, and obviously we've not heard the manifestos, is how different will the manifestos actually be from each other? Because if we've commented on this over the past few weeks and months. If you listen to what Wes Streeting says and Keir Starmer say, there's not that much difference from what the Tories have been saying when it comes to general practice. It's still the same message of they want to focus on access. There has been some tempering, but then does that mean that it's the same situation? Will a new government talk to the profession the same way? Who knows? But it's an interesting perspective, and I'm not sure that it means that industrial action, even if we were to have a new government, should be something that's pushed back away from.
Gandhi, I'm going to put a pin in access. Before you go, I want to ask you about access and put a tweet that you did earlier in the day on the screen. So we'll probably have that as your parting shot, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think some of the timing around the election is interesting, actually. As you say, it's taken everybody by surprise. The vote that the BMA are taking to partners about industrial action, runs from the, I think, the 27th of June through to the 29th of July. So the election is kind of bang in the middle of that, which is interesting. May or may not influence that vote. And industrial action is not due to begin until the 1st of August, either way, which will be with the existing or new government, whoever becomes the government for the next 4 or 5 years afterwards. So I think that the timing is interesting. The other thought that I immediately had was, how does this interact with the airtime and the media impact of GP industrial action and the noise around it? And I'm not quite sure which side of the fence I come down on, really. On the one hand, you could imagine this really taking the wind out of the sails of the BMA and the GPC's campaign as attention is drawn elsewhere. Equally, if they can really strike a chord as a major theme for the election, and the NHS will be, this could draw a lot of attention to the campaign. And I'm not quite sure which side it's going to come down on. I suspect it might take the wind out of the sails, because I don't think either Labour nor the Conservatives want to highlight the fight with general practice that will be continuing after the election. But that was my initial thought. Tara, I know you expressed some thoughts on it earlier. We're all having a turn. I said I wouldn't put Tara on the spot, but I've done it. Sorry, Tara.
It's okay. I think it's just probably to echo what Gandhi said. I think everybody's been looking at the news and trying to look at the commentary, and there isn't really much there because the manifestos aren't there. I don't think it's going to have an immediate impact on day-to-day general practice. And I think that I think let's just wait rather than constantly hypothesizing. Let's see what the manifestos say first. But I think the wider point to all of this is with our just normal human people hats on, is to vote. You know, like, and I was saying that I'm what they would call, I said, you know, like I'm undecided. So I don't vote the same way all of the time. And I think we all just have to look at what's really important to us and to make sure we have got a mechanism to get our voices heard. I'll put hands up, I haven't always voted. I will vote this year.
I think it could have an impact on the industrial action, just because the Doctors and Dentists Review Body is due to report by the end of June. And then what happens is the government have to choose to accept or not those recommendations. And so what it means is it's going to be down to a different government to choose to accept those recommendations. And if they come up with a reasonable pay increase, and then that is chosen to be accepted by a new government who want to deflate the whole prospect of industrial action, then it could put an end to it. And it could end up being there's more chance, I think, of a decent financial settlement for general practice with a new government than if we'd have been stuck with the existing government. So I think actually it's an opportunity.
I think, just to clarify my position, I'm not saying it won't have an impact on general practice, but the lead up before the vote happens between now and the 4th, I don't think normal day-to-day general practice is going to be any different. But of course, whatever the outcome is, then that's a different conversation.
Good. So, Gandhi, your top tweet from that really interested me from today was this graph. I think plotting overall experience of general practice as per the GP survey against the average number of appointments per 1,000 patients per month at practices. And it looks really messy, but can you tell us a bit more about why you tweeted this, Gandhi?
So the basic reason for tweeting this and the lead up to this was that what they showed, and they reviewed the answers to the GP survey questions. The correlation that came from many of the earlier ones was that, for example, how nice your receptionist is, does that have an association with happiness from patients? And yes, that has an association. This one is around the number of the appointments offered by practices. And this was based off using those 182 practices that closed in the past couple of years as a test bed versus the control, which is the practices that open. And actually, when you compare them, what you can see from that graph is that irrespective of how many appointments you actually offer, it doesn't improve patient satisfaction. So actually, the amount of appointments you provide has no correlation with patient satisfaction. That is a really interesting perspective to hear, and it's a really indicting kind of data set to look at things.
Gandhi, did they graph how often you get to see your usual GP? Because I think they do ask that on the GP survey.
They graphed the top 3 questions, which was one was around reception time, one was seeing your GP, and I can't remember what the third one was. I'm really sorry.
Okay, because I just wondered if that measure of continuity had more of an impact. Okay, that's great. Gandhi, it sounds like you need to go and see if there's any food left at all.
Hopefully my dinner's still there. But all I can say is this has been a great experience. I think if anybody does have the opportunity to go to conferences, it's definitely one to participate in. And I will absolutely be feeding back on everything after tomorrow's stuff on the channel as well. So please join us for that at some point. I'm going to leave you in the absolutely capable hands of Andy, Ben, and Tara. I know they've got some awesome stuff to talk with you about as well. So we'll catch you all soon. I'm going to go eat.
Thanks, Gandhi. Enjoy your food. Thanks for joining us. Good. We just had a comment from Anish Patel, so we'll just bring that on screen. It's quite small, so I'll read it. So the last Conservative manifesto had 6,000 GPs on it. I really hope that KBS keeps the pressure on for change. We can't carry on like this, which I guess sort of sums up probably the mood of many people in the profession, actually. And we're waiting for the manifestos. I suspect the content's probably already been determined, and they're just sort of breaking the glass on them and getting them out there. So I guess we've got a few minutes just to wrap up. I mean, do you have any thoughts about the conference, having chatted with Gandhi while he's there live? Sort of either of you, anything strike you about what he's told us about the conference or the process in general?
I just think it's really interesting. I would never, being a non-GP, it's not on my radar. So yeah, I think it is really, really interesting.
I think it's interesting what he said about Katie Brown-Steiner being there, and I know she's been the chair of that conference before, and now she's taken on that role. She's been much more vocal about taking what comes out of that conference and making sure it feeds into GPC policy. Whereas I think there has been a gap between the two in the past. So I think that link between, because you want a link, don't you, between your practice, your local LMC, and then what the people are negotiating on your behalf in the national contract. So I think it feels like the practices, the profession's moving in the right direction about trying to get some leadership and standing together, because whilst we're trying to stand together locally, we have to stand together nationally as well.
Yeah, I'd echo those comments about KBS or Katie Bramall-Steiner. And I can see she has actually been in getting a message out to Pulse, who tend to pick up on her tweets actually, and then sort of construct stories around it. But she sort of said the election doesn't change anything, plans for collective action continue. So she's sort of getting ahead of that. And she seems to be quite good at sort of keeping up with the news cycle and trying to keep a relevant voice out there. So I think that's really good. The other thing that really interested me about the conference was just kind of the mechanics of it, and how the motions are drafted and debated and then go on to potentially make up, GPC's negotiating position. It's just really interesting to get inside the mechanics of all of that.
I've got a question for you, Andy. Why do GPs love a vote so much? I mean, GPs, they love a vote, don't they?
I've never sort of not been a medic professionally, so I don't know whether other professions are different to that. Are other people different? You're from management backgrounds. Do you not have a vote on a motion and debate the wording of the motion and then decide whether that goes forward to another committee to potentially form a negotiating position or not, that goes to another discussion that then might lead to contract change? Do you not work like that?
No one cares what the managers have to say. There's too many managers. We need to just shush.
Okay.
I remember when I first started working with groups of GPs from different practices, and they would go, sometimes even if they were getting bored, it'd be like, oh, well, let's have a vote then. Just stop the discussion. Let's just have a vote. It was like voting is like the default kind of way of operating in general practice, and I've not seen it anywhere else. I mean, not in secondary care, not anywhere.
That is interesting, because it feels very natural, but I've just been conditioned, I suppose, in that way. It's a great way to resolve an issue, have a vote.
I don't know if it is though, right? Because if you vote, so someone's going to vote against and lose, and so it creates winners and losers. And so what happens is the vote's carried, all right, that's what most people wanted, but it means you've got this set of people who voted against it. It's like people who didn't vote for Brexit. Doesn't mean they're like, oh, I'm pro-Brexit now, because more people voted for it than voted against it, like me.
Yeah, I suppose often people go away and stew, and then they go and plot with other people about how not to follow through on the vote. But for small local issues, maybe that's the sort of thing that I see. So we've maybe just got a few minutes left with just the three of us, and I was just wondering if there was anything in the news cycle or any particular theme in general practice or primary care networks or primary care that sort of captured your attention over the past few weeks or months that you think is interesting to highlight. I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on anything.
I've got one.
Go on, Tara.
I think in the last few, I'd say since the start of the new financial year, I am seeing a lot of networks offload like their ARS providers and contracts. So they want to bring everything in-house. And it's just interesting. I kind of get it. I think how they end a contract is interesting. I don't think primary care networks are good at ending relationships.
What do you mean? What's an example of what you mean in terms of a contract that's terminated and how?
So
without naming names.
No, I didn't want to get myself cancelled. But I think where an Rs provider has been providing a contract for years, and it all seems fine, all seems okay, and then all of a sudden that Rs provider will just get an email to say, like, we're terminating the contract. There's been no conversation or anything, and once it just becomes really awkward. And I would say it's okay to end a contract, but if you've been working with somebody for years, or like an organization or somebody working with them for years, I just find it, I just think the decent thing to do would be to have the conversation, to say, look, this is a situation, this is what we're going to do, and like, according to the terms of our arrangement, we're going to look to terminate it. Then the conversations around, like, to pay comes up all of the time. But it just becomes like they've made the decision and then they've gone, I need you out. Like, they just need you out of the door. And it just causes really unnecessary tension.
I'm seeing that at different levels, Tara. So in PCNs, where, say, the PCN is delivering a service, suddenly we're seeing practices say, no, we want to deliver that service ourselves as a practice rather than being done by the PCN. And where a federation is delivering it for a PCN, the PCN is saying, no, we want to bring that in-house. And I think all of this is linked to the fact that practices are struggling financially because the contract's been under-resourced. And so as practices operate in a more difficult financial environment, then what happens is people think, well, what can we do to get more income in? And it's like, okay, we could bring things in-house because that's the way. And you're right, that isn't done in a particularly good way. And it tends to be at the expense of the relationship with the practices in the PCN, or at the expense of the relationship with the other PCNs in the federation. And we're seeing that all over the place. But I think it's the environment that's causing it. I think that's what's behind it.
Yeah, I think a lot of practices are quite financially distressed, and at risk of handing back contracts, and people look at what they can do to shore up their financial position. And I think that creates a tendency to kind of draw any resources closer to the practice. I think
that's absolutely fine. I think contracts end all of the time, right? Things start and things end all of the time. Nothing lasts forever. But I just think it's I don't know, they're just not very good at communicating. I think that's been interesting. I think people take it too personally. It's a business contractual relationship and nothing lasts forever. So I just think that's something that's come up, and the financial motivations absolutely get it. And I think this is the financial planning, really understanding the resources. We talked a lot about this at PCN Plus. What services, what roles, what activities are value to the network? And if things aren't of value, then things need to change. So I think the rationale, absolutely, but I just think it's how we treat people, how we communicate, how we work to the contracts that have been set up, and just be mindful of that, because I think what goes around comes around, and everybody just pops up in different places and different roles.
But the impact is potentially worse for general practice itself, though, because if what happens is, because of the financial pressures, general practice kind of turns on itself. I know you're talking about third-party contractors, but if you take it, the context being general practice wanting to do things differently within general practice, and then relationships break down within general practice. So just at the point when general practice needs to be exerting influence on the system, exerting influence on contracts, standing together, it ends up like fracturing because of the financial pressure. That could actually be more damaging than the situation was before.
Yeah, it's difficult times, isn't it? I can see how a lot of practices, I'm thinking about perhaps fairly local situations where people are looking to reconfigure the primary care network resources in a way that sort of maybe better supports individual practice finances and performance and core obligations. So I think that's what we're happening. But I totally take on board what you're saying, Tara. There's a good way to end relationships and there's a bad way. And what did someone once say to me? It's like breaking up with can't remember exactly, but it's like you need a good breakup. It's a bit like breaking up with a person, because they talk to other people. You might want to go out with them again in the future. You know, you never know. So you've got to be careful. You know, break up well. You know, and how your new partner broke up with their last partner is a good indication of how they might treat you.
Yeah.
All sorts of analogies. So there's reputational risk, isn't there? But Ben, did you have any particular theme or story or issue that you've been picking up on in the past few months or weeks?
The interesting thing that's been it keeps coming up with me is it's this whole question of the additional roles from the PCNs, right? And kind of how do we get the most out of them? And in the context of, is it worth it? is it worth the hassle? Like, you know what I mean? So there's like and it seems like every PCN I go and work with, we're having to almost like go back to, you know, why have we in the first place, and then how do we add value? It's strange having to start it all again, like 5 years on. I don't know if that's something you two have come across.
I think so. I think there's sort of, people are beginning to no longer see the resource as like an additional resource, because the core funding is not going up. The penny's sort of dropping, really, that this was the new money for general practice. And I think people perhaps didn't engage, or many practices didn't engage fully the first time around, you know, when things were being decided the first time, because they had what they perceived as the main pressures at that time going on, and left it in some places to, you know, the people who are in the PCNs to organize all of that. I think now people have realized that actually, whilst initially there were conversations about employing, you know, one social prescriber, you know, at the beginning, actually that's become, you know, £1.5 million, you know, for a fairly average sized primary care network. And now there's a real resource there, and people are interested now, particularly as there's a core squeeze. So I have seen it, Ben. Yeah, I think I see the phenomenon you're describing. How about you, Tara?
Every day.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go on, Ben. Were you going to elaborate?
No, it's fine.
No. I'll bring a trend that I've noticed. So, and I've given a name to this trend. I might be the first person to call it out for this, but I was noticing again. There was another story in Pulse in the media about another ICB pursuing same-day access hubs at scale, mandating that all primary care networks, you know, together move to adopt this. And I think that there's a theme over the past few years of the system taking sort of pilot things that have been quite successfully locally in certain situations, and adopting them as the general answer to kind of lots of problems in the primary care and general practice. So I'm sort of calling these this hero policy, that people kind of cherry pick something potentially from somewhere, and they turn it into a bit of a heroic policy that they feel will solve lots of problems in lots of places, and it gets rolled out at a big scale when we don't necessarily fully, or many people would say that we don't fully understand the benefits and the pros and cons in situations outside of those pilot situations. And I think, you know, same-day access hubs could be an example of this. And I think that we need to be careful, I think, and do all the local engagement and make sure we understand what the impact will be. I don't know, is that something that either of you have sort of noticed happening or picked up on? Tara's shaking her head.
Not really.
I think the NHS has done that for a long time. You know,
Have
like it is a sort of, you know, some influential leader or politician in their local practice, or that they do this, right? So everybody does that, and that will solve the problems for everyone. I mean, that's just kind of one of the problems with the NHS. I think the interesting thing for me about the first attempt to have mandatory hubs for same-day access across practices was that one of the primary reasons that didn't happen was because of like the pushback from patients who didn't want that. And I think we've seen, you know, I've seen in a few places now, like that example, places where ICBs have tried to put change practices and say they can only become branch surgeries, and that being stopped because of the patient voice. And I think that, you know, I think historically, where practices have felt, the practice participation groups, a bit of something we have to manage, a bit of a drain on resource, not something that helpful. But where general practice can have these really single important issues and get the local population with them, then they can have a really powerful voice in changing decisions and actually influencing what actually happens. So I think that is something we should look out for general practice doing in future.
Yeah, good. You know what, Ben? That might be a nice place to wrap up. Really, just sort of taking that back to the power of patient voice and patient groups, and that actually that can make a difference. Because you're right, it did seem to make a difference in Northwest London, where there was patient opposition to sort of same-day access models being rolled out. So maybe that's a good place to end. Any other business from you, Tara, before we go?
No.
Yes, no from Tara. And Ben, any other business?
Don't forget to sign up, PCN Plus. It'd be great to have you on the course.
Yeah, let's bring that back on the screen. And that'll be my any other business as well. Just check it out. Just go to the website and check it out. Links will be in the show notes. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Gandhi. I'm sure hopefully he's got some food and is getting filled up. Thank you everybody for watching tonight. And I think we have a recorded episode going out next week, and we'll be back live the week after that. Thank you and good night.